Hey everybody, KC here with Michael Sansolo, and we are, as we record this, just at the end of the PLMA Leadership Conference in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we thought we'd reflect a little bit back on some of the things that we saw here. I mean, first of all, it was interesting. There was a lot of, as you would expect at a private label conference, a lot of conversation about what differentiates private label. And number one, and a lot of speakers talked about this in a lot of different contexts, price continues to be the driver in terms of adoption of private label by consumers.
But it's not the only driver, and
Right.
that was so interesting that while price is the number one reason consumers will pick private label, number two is taste.
Right.
So if you don't have the quality, you're not going to compete. Private label, and one of the goals of this association, obviously it's the Private Label Manufacturers Association, is that private label is now as good as or better than
Right.
national brand. And I think what we heard a lot here was a lot of optimism and a lot of joy because they feel like they are growing really strongly right now, and there's a lot of good signs for the future.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, one of the things is taste may be number two, but if you either return to that product or you return to a different product with the same private label, taste maybe end up being number one, because what happens is you start to develop a sense of loyalty to the brand because they continue to prove it. It continues to prove itself.
And you know, it's interesting. The closing speaker was Jack Sinclair of Sprouts, and he talked about how private label becomes that driver
Right.
that keeps loyalty because you can't find that product at any other store.
Didn't he say 20? Well, I don't know if it was 25% of total store sales or 25% of grocery sales is private label.
I think
at
he said of
Sprouts.
total sales.
Yeah, and he made it clear that he wanted to grow it.
Absolutely, and he is from the UK,
Right.
where private label is very strong, and clearly his goal is to get to a UK
Yeah.
level.
And formerly of Walmart.
And formerly
he
of
talked a
Walmart.
lot about how Walmart has really depended on private label as a key differentiator. Obviously, again, not the only one, but a key one.
And one of the points he made about Walmart that I thought was so interesting, because he's talking to manufacturers, he said if your first goal is to get into Walmart, there's so much volume involved there that you can run into problems with that. He said it's better
And if it
to
doesn't
start-
work, unwinding it is a nightmare.
Yeah, because you're stuck with
Right.
tons of inventory and all kinds of capacity. He said start smaller, not that Sprouts is
Yeah.
small, but start with a smaller company and work your way to Walmart. Don't work your way from Walmart to others.
Right. And he had a great line about that. He said, hey, listen, we want to push you, but we want you to push us.
Yes.
So he's being very aggressive. I mean, he talks about 1,200 sites or something. I mean, and he clearly has a strategy and a geographic plan for how he wants to do that.
You know, you listen to him and you got to believe there's going to be a Sprouts in your neighborhood
Oh,
sooner
yeah,
or later.
yeah. And I do think, I mean, I've been to enough Sprouts, and I've been to enough Whole Foods, that I find Sprouts to be a really compelling alternative to Whole Foods, in part because it's being run by somebody who understands physical retail in a way that Amazon does not. And Amazon, again, I think most people would say Whole Foods has lost some steps since Amazon acquired it.
Well, I thought it was interesting. He said with some of their newer stores, they're actually going back to their older model of design, which makes it easier for the consumer upon entering to see all the fresh food departments and reinforce that image that we are fresh. And it's a smaller footprint, but again, to your point about Whole Foods, some of their footprints have gotten larger.
Right.
And Sprouts, you always have to do what the others don't. It's
Right.
the old baseball thing,
Yeah.
hit them where they ain't.
Yeah.
And that seems to be what they're doing.
The other thing, as we are here and we're all watching, we're listening to the announcement of tariffs, we're seeing the reaction of tariffs, everybody's checking their phones to see what the stock market is doing. As we record this, I don't want to talk about the number because it's too
not go
depressing. But it was interesting because it seemed like the vast majority of people in the room, their companies have skin in this game, because they were almost all sourcing product from outside the United States. They're trying to figure out how it's going to affect their business. That's the bad news. The good news is, at the end of the day, even if everybody's prices go up, private label prices are likely not to go up as much.
Right.
And that could, again, it ties back into that being a key differentiator.
I know I heard people casually talking about it could be an ingredient they get from abroad. I was talking to one person who brings in paper products, and he said, you have to understand, the wood we need for some of those paper products is not grown in the United States. So the tariffs were clearly on everyone's mind. The other point I wanted to share was they also talked about Aldi. and the hard discounters, and as all these footprint grows, which it is, Aldi is a private label retailer.
Right.
And it is going to even add more fuel to the fire of private label being a differentiator. It was a very interesting meeting, and frankly, a lot of national brand guys have to look at what's going on here and figure out how are they going to answer this. Because as you said, the price, the hard discounters, all of these elements could further erode national brand.
Now you did 2 sessions here.
Yes.
I did the one, I talked about that on Friday. You did 2 sessions. One was about C-stores and one was about the impact of GLP-1 drugs on sales in product development and sales in retail. So talk a little bit about your sessions.
All right, well, the convenience store session, and I had a guy from Casey's, it was a panel. And what we were discussing was that convenience stores have changed their model. They are much less all about gas, becoming a lot more about food. Casey's, for instance, is the 5th largest seller of pizza in the United States, after like Domino's, Pizza Hut, and folks like that. And he talked about we need more private label because we're trying to have a bigger footprint in that area. For me, and I've been on this horse for a while, the GLP-1 session, and this is about the drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, is what does this mean for product manufacturers? And we had a registered dietitian and someone from a company that does a lot of nutraceuticals, that kind of work. And they said there is no denying this is going to have enormous impact on the consumer base and will have enormous impact on how products are marketed, how they're formulated, because people, I have not, people who've been on Ozempic.
Absolutely.
And it changes how they eat. They don't want as much food because their body is telling them you're full. Well, the food they want more vivid taste. They want food to be special. And it's a really interesting discussion, and quite honestly, at the end of the discussion, our point to the audience was, if you are not talking about the impact of GLP-1 on your product, you're missing an enormous, and it could be an enormous problem, because as the dietitian, Connie Diekman, who is just brilliant, said, it's close to 70% of the American population is either obese or overweight.
Right.
70% of customers suddenly not wanting to eat as much, that could be billions of dollars of sales disappearing. So it is an issue that really needs a lot more attention.
And in so many ways, I think we've only scratched the surface in terms of the number of people who are using these drugs, even though, I think the point was right now, the only, I don't know what you would call it, popular drug you use, you had the slide, right?
Yes.
It's basically Viagra, and then it's Ozempic, in terms of people knowing it.
And that was about awareness, and that was from a study of about 6 months ago. So by this point, because think of how long you've known about Viagra. Ozempic, we haven't known about that long.
I'm sorry, Viagra.
I'm not going to ask any personal questions, but it's probably likely by this point more people know about Ozempic because the commercials are on constantly, Wegovy, all of those drugs. And for this industry,
Ozempic has become the name for it, even if you're taking something else, in the same way people think of Band-Aids and Scotch tape.
And the other point we tried to make is it's not just about food products. It will change the kind of makeup people use. It changes clothing. It has all these ripple effects. It has effects on gym membership. I use the point that United Airlines has already estimated how much fuel they will save by flying thinner Americans.
But and the point I was going to make was we're only at the beginning of it because insurance companies are largely not underwriting it unless you are technically obese, or you're diabetic, clinically obese, or you're actually diabetic as opposed to, let's say, being pre-diabetic or on the verge of obesity. That makes no sense in a lot of ways because they're going to end up paying for it down there. At some point, somebody's going to do a study and they're going to realize, okay, it probably makes sense. Better we should pay a little bit more now so we don't have these big payouts at the end.
And again, one of the points.
And then I think usage is going to, pretty soon we're going to have over-the-counter Ozempic.
No doubt, or some form of a GLP-1 or semaglutide.
And some of those do exist because there are supplements out there with GLP-1. They're not proven. That's a little. I'm not sure I'd want to take one. But I know people, I've talked to people who have used those and have lost 10, 15, 20 pounds.
And the people I know who have taken it said it has changed their everyday in a good way. I think, though, what folks also have to realize is it's not just about food. It changes clothing.
Right, you said that. Yeah.
It changes so many aspects of our lives, and this really, I used the point that Scott Galloway, who we both follow his podcast, had said he thinks the impact of GLP-1s far outstrips the impact of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And we all talk about artificial intelligence. GLP-1s could be a bigger deal.
Just to wrap this up, you go to this meeting all the time. This is the first time I've been to this meeting, and it's been a while since I've been to a private label meeting. I have to say, I really found this interesting. I think, first of all, these guys are doing a great job. I think that the way it's structured, the sessions, there's a lot of smart people on the stage. And speaking of smart people, it's interesting. I mean, we were here in Scottsdale, and I think in part that's one of the reasons that Jack Sinclair from Sprouts, they're based in Phoenix, was able to be here. Well, guess what? Next year they're going to be in Bentonville.
Why would they do that?
I don't know. I hear there's a little bit of retailing going on there.
Maybe that's the reason. Yeah.
Listen, whoever they get from Walmart, it's going to be somebody pretty significant. I'm sure they've already booked it, and they're not telling us. And Walmart is an enormous player in the private label business.
They're an enormous player in any business they're
true.
in.
Right.
But when you hear of a conference moving to Bentonville,
Right.
Arkansas, nothing against Bentonville, but that's not the usual.
Yeah.
I mean, we're here in
Well, it should
Scottsdale.
be, but it should be.
It should
Yeah,
be,
yes.
absolutely. But there's a golf course
Right.
behind us, Camelback Mountain. You're not going to get that in Bentonville, I don't think.
I'm not sure.
Probably this golf course.
But they're going to learn a lot, and that's the point.
And that's it, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, well, thank you for being here. I
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. That's what's on our minds this morning, and as always, we want to hear what's on your mind.